The text arrived at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as I was inspecting the foundation cracks in the Morrison building downtown. My phone buzzed against my hip, and I figured it was Keena asking about dinner plans. Instead, I got 12 words that would change everything. "I'm going to stay at my ex's for a week. I need a break from you." I stared at the screen for a full minute, standing there in the basement of a condemned office building, with my flashlight casting shadows on crumbling concrete. The Morrison place had been rotting from the inside for years, just like my marriage, apparently. The difference was that I got paid to document structural failures in buildings. Nobody was paying me to catalog the ways my wife had been falling apart. My first instinct was to call her. My second was to throw the phone against the wall. Instead, I did what I always do when something doesn't make sense. I gathered more information. "As you wish," I typed back. Simple, clean, no drama. The drive home took 23 minutes through the gray October streets of our mid-sized East Coast city. The leaves were turning that particular shade of brown that meant winter was coming whether you were ready or not. I pulled into our driveway and sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the house Keena and I had bought 3 years ago. White colonial, black shutters, perfectly manicured lawn. The kind of place that screamed successful couple to the neighbors. Inside, the house felt different. Colder. I walked through the rooms, noting details the way I do at work sites. Keena's laptop was gone from the kitchen counter. Her overnight bag was missing from the bedroom closet. But her car keys were still hanging on the hook by the garage door. Interesting. I went to my workshop in the basement and pulled out my toolbox. Not the one with hammers and screwdrivers, but the other one. The one with the GPS trackers, the backup drives, and the small recording devices I used for insurance fraud investigations. Being a forensic building inspector meant knowing how to find things people wanted to hide. Structural problems, code violations, evidence of tampering. The skills transferred surprisingly well to personal situations. 6 months ago, I'd started having suspicions. Little things, Keena working late more often. New clothes she claimed were from her sister. Phone calls she took in the other room. So I'd done what any reasonable husband would do. I'd installed some insurance. The GPS tracker on her car showed she was currently at 1247 Riverside Drive, Drake Torrin's penthouse, her ex-boyfriend from college, the one she'd mentioned casually a few times over the years. "Just an old friend," she'd said. "Nobody important." I pulled up the backup files from her laptop, the ones that automatically synced to a hidden drive every night. Her email account opened like a book I'd been waiting to read. 3 months of messages with Drake, photos I wished I hadn't seen, hotel reservations for therapy sessions that had nothing to do with mental health. The timeline was clear. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a plan. My phone rang. Benny Lafferty, my best friend since high school, and the only ex-cop I knew who'd quit the force to start his own security consulting business. "Trent, you sound weird," he said before I'd even spoken. "What's going on?" "Keena left. She's at her ex's place." "The fitness guy? The one with the ridiculous abs?" "That's the one." Benny was quiet for a moment. Then, "You want to talk about it or you want to do something about it?" I looked at the evidence spread across my workbench. Photos, messages, location data. Everything I needed to understand exactly how long my wife had been planning to humiliate me. "I want to do something about it. I'll be right over." 20 minutes later, Benny was sitting in my kitchen, scrolling through printouts of Keena's messages while I made coffee. He was built like a linebacker, which had served him well during his police days, but his real talent was for seeing patterns, finding connections other people missed. "This is bad, man," he said, holding up a particularly explicit exchange. "She's been planning this for months." "I know. And this Drake guy, he's married, right?" "Zara Torrin. They've been together for 5 years. Benny grinned, and I recognized the expression. It was the same look he used to get when we were kids, and he'd figured out a way to get revenge on the bullies who picked on us. So we've got two cheating spouses, both thinking they're being clever, he said, both with reputations to protect. What are you thinking? I'm thinking your wife wanted a break. Let's make sure she gets one she'll never forget. I poured coffee into 2 mugs and sat down across from him. No violence, no property damage, nothing that gets us arrested. Of course not. We're civilized people. Benny's smile got wider, but there's more than one way to ruin someone's life. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Benny had contacts from his police days, people who could help with surveillance, information gathering, documentation. I had my own resources, access to city records, building codes, and a professional reputation that opened doors. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. By the time Benny left at midnight, we had a strategy. It was elegant in its simplicity. Keena wanted to humiliate me by running off with her ex? Fine. But she'd forgotten one important detail about her husband. I was very, very good at finding structural weaknesses and bringing down things that looked solid from the outside. I went to bed alone for the first time in 8 years, but I wasn't lonely. I was planning. The next morning I drove to work as usual. The Morrison building was scheduled for demolition in 2 weeks, and I needed to finish my report. But first, I made a phone call to Helena Trenwall, the sharpest divorce attorney in the city. We'd worked together on a few insurance cases, and I knew she had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when the situation called for it. "Trent," she said when she picked up, "please tell me you're calling about work. I need a divorce attorney." "I see. How fast do you want this done?" "Fast. And public." Helena was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. "Oh, this is going to be fun. Come by my office at lunch, bring everything." At noon, I sat in Helena's downtown office with a folder full of evidence. She flipped through the photos and messages with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen it all before. "Your wife is either very stupid or very confident," she said finally. "Both. The good news is that this is a no-fault state, so we don't need to prove adultery for the divorce. The bad news is that means the evidence won't help you financially. I don't want her money. I want her reputation." Helena smiled. It was not a warm expression. "Now you're speaking my language. I assume you have a plan?" I told her about Benny's surveillance idea, about the GPS tracking, about Zara Toreen, who probably had no idea her husband was cheating. "Interesting," Helena said. "And you want me to handle the paperwork while you handle the publicity?" "Something like that." She leaned back in her chair. "I'll have the divorce papers ready by tomorrow afternoon. After that, it's just a matter of timing." "What do you mean?" "Well, you could serve them to Keena privately, like a civilized person. Or..." She paused, her smile getting wider. "You could have them delivered to her current address, in front of witnesses, during business hours." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like the satisfaction of finding the perfect solution to a complex structural problem. Do it. That evening, I met Benny at Maggie's bar, a dive on the south side of town where the drinks were strong and the gossip was stronger. Maggie herself was behind the bar, a tough woman in her 40s who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "Trent," she called out when we walked in, "where's your better half?" "Taking a break," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. Maggie's expression shifted. She'd been tending bar long enough to recognize the tone of a man whose life had just taken a hard left turn. "What kind of break?" "The kind where she's staying at her ex-boyfriend's penthouse." The bar went quiet. Not completely silent, but quiet enough that I knew the conversation had been overheard. Maggie poured me a double whiskey without being asked. "Drake Torin?" she said. You know him? Honey, everyone knows Drake. Pretty boy with more muscles than brains, married to that ice queen Zara. She leaned closer. Word is their marriage is all for show. She's got the money, he's got the looks, and they both pretend to be happy. What about Keena? Maggie's expression hardened. Your wife's been coming in here with her girlfriends for months, talking about how boring you are, how predictable, how she deserves better. She poured herself a shot and downed it. Always rubbed me the wrong way. You're a good man, Trent. You deserve better than that. Benny nudged me. Sounds like you've got support. More than that, Maggie said. You've got an audience. Half the women in this city are tired of listening to Keena complain about her marriage while she runs around with other men. Give them a reason to turn on her, and they will. I finished my whiskey and stood up. Then let's give them a reason. The next day was Thursday. Helena called at 2 p.m. to tell me the papers were ready. Benny called at 3 p.m. to tell me his surveillance had paid off. He had photos of Keena and Drake together, along with audio recordings of some very private conversations. They're not being careful, he said. It's like they think no one's watching. Maybe they think I'm too boring to fight back. Their mistake. At 4 p.m., I made one more phone call to Zara Torren. Mrs. Torren, this is Trent Ardell. I think we need to talk. There was a long pause. Then, I've been wondering when you'd call. You know? I know my husband, and I know your wife. The question is, what are you planning to do about it? I told her about the divorce papers, about the delivery, about the evidence Benny had gathered. Interesting, she said, and her voice was as cold as winter rain. And what do you want from me? An audience, and maybe some help with the timing. Another pause. Then, I'll be at home tomorrow at 5 p.m. I'll make sure there are witnesses. Friday afternoon, I sat in my truck across the street from Drake's penthouse building and watched Helena's courier walk up to the front entrance. The plan was simple. Serve the divorce papers to Keena at Drake's address, in front of Zara, with plenty of witnesses around to see the drama unfold. My phone buzzed with a text from Benny. In position. Recording everything. At exactly 5 p.m., the courier knocked on Drake's door. Through my binoculars, I could see Zara Torren standing in the hallway, along with two neighbors who'd been conveniently watering plants in the corridor. The door opened. Keena appeared, looking confused. Keena Ardell? The courier said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes? Divorce papers. Sign here. The look on Keena's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Confusion, then shock, then panic as she realized where she was and who was watching. Zara stepped forward. Excuse me, but why are you serving divorce papers at my husband's address? The courier shrugged. This is the address we were given for the respondent. Keena's phone started ringing, then ringing again, and again. I smiled and drove home. By 6 p.m., my phone had 17 missed calls from Keena. I ignored them all and went to Maggie's bar instead. The place was buzzing with excitement. Did you hear? One of Keena's former friends was saying to another. She got served with divorce papers right in front of Drake's wife. I heard Zara recorded the whole thing. Someone else added. Maggie caught my eye and winked. Drinks are on the house tonight, honey. I ordered a beer and settled in to watch the show. My phone kept buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from Keena, but I didn't read them. Not yet. Let her panic. Let her wonder what else I knew. What else I was planning. The real fun was just getting started. Saturday morning brought 34 missed calls and a string of text messages that progressed from confused to angry to desperate. I read them over coffee, analyzing each one like I would examine stress fractures in a building's foundation. Trent, what the hell is going on? Why won't you answer your phone? This is insane. We need to talk. I know you're getting these messages. Please, just call me back. The last one, sent at 3:47 a.m., was the most telling. I made a mistake. Can we fix this? Too late for that conversation. I deleted all the messages without responding and got dressed for work. The Morrison building was scheduled for its final inspection before demolition, which meant I had legitimate reasons to be downtown with my equipment. But first, I had a stop to make. Benny was waiting in his surveillance van 2 blocks from Drake's penthouse, surrounded by monitors and recording equipment that would have made the FBI jealous. "Morning, sunshine," he said when I climbed into the passenger seat. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months." "What did you get?" He handed me a tablet showing video footage from the previous evening. Drake and Keena on his balcony, having what looked like a heated argument. The audio was crystal clear. "She's furious," Benny said. "Keeps asking him why he didn't warn her you might do something like this. He keeps telling her you're too much of a pushover to cause real problems." Interesting assessment. Gets better. Watch this part. The video showed Keena pacing back and forth, gesticulating wildly. "You said Zara didn't suspect anything. You said she was clueless." Drake's response was classic. "How was I supposed to know she'd be standing right there when the papers got delivered?" "Because it's her building, you idiot." I smiled. They're turning on each other already. "It's beautiful to watch," Benny agreed. "But here's the really good part." He switched to a different camera angle, this one showing Zara Torin in her own apartment, talking on the phone. The audio wasn't as clear, but we could make out enough. "Documented everything. My attorney will be very interested. Yes, I think it's time." "She's moving fast," I said. "Faster than you think. I did some checking last night. Zara's got family money, serious family money. She could buy and sell Drake 10 times over. The only reason she hasn't divorced him yet is because she's been waiting for the right moment. And we just gave it to her." "Exactly." I spent the morning at the Morrison building, documenting the final structural issues before the demolition crew moved in, but my mind was on strategy. Keena and Drake thought they were dealing with a predictable, boring husband who would eventually forgive and forget. They had no idea they were actually dealing with someone who understood how to systematically dismantle things that looked solid from the outside. At lunch, I drove to the upscale fitness club where Drake worked as a personal trainer. The place was all glass and chrome, filled with people who had more money than sense and more time than purpose. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in the parking lot and made phone calls. The first was to my insurance company, updating my policy to remove Keena as a beneficiary. The second was to our joint bank account, freezing it pending the divorce proceedings. The third was to our mortgage company, informing them that one of the borrowers was contesting the loan terms. Each call was perfectly legal. Each one would make Keena's life significantly more complicated. My phone rang while I was finishing the paperwork. Helena Trenwall. "Trent, we need to talk. Can you come by my office?" "Problem?" "The opposite. Opportunity." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Helena's desk while she spread out a collection of documents. "I've been doing some research on your wife's situation," she said. "Did you know she's been using your joint credit cards to pay for hotel rooms?" I suspected. "Did you know she charged a weekend trip to Boston last month? 2 people, 1 room, very expensive restaurant bills?" I didn't know the specifics. Helena smiled. "The credit card company keeps detailed records, dates, times, locations, very detailed records." She handed me a printout, 3 months of charges that painted a clear picture of an affair. Hotels, restaurants, gifts, even a jewelry store purchase I definitely hadn't authorized. "This doesn't help with the divorce settlement," Helena continued, "but it does establish a pattern of deception. More importantly, it gives us leverage." "What kind of leverage?" "The kind where your wife realizes that fighting this divorce will result in every sordid detail becoming public record. Most people prefer to settle quietly, rather than have their affairs documented in court filings that anyone can access." I studied the credit card statements. "She's been planning this for a long time. At least 3 months, based on this evidence. Probably longer." Then she won't be surprised when I plan my response just as carefully. Helena's smile got wider. What did you have in mind? I told her about Benny's surveillance, about Zara Torren's obvious preparations for her own divorce, about the network of gossips and former friends who were already turning against Kina. You want to orchestrate a public humiliation, Helena said. I want to give her exactly what she asked for. A break, a permanent one. And Drake? Collateral damage. Helena leaned back in her chair. I like it, but we need to be careful. No harassment, no stalking, no threats. Everything has to be legal and above board. Of course. Good, because I have an idea that might interest you. She pulled out another document. Zara Torren's attorney contacted me this morning. Apparently, Mrs. Torren is very interested in coordinating our efforts. Meaning? Meaning, she wants to make sure that when she destroys her husband, your wife gets caught in the blast radius. That evening, I met Zara Torren for the first time at a coffee shop downtown. She was exactly what I'd expected, elegant, cold, and absolutely furious, the kind of woman who smiled while planning your destruction. Mr. Ardell, she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. Thank you for calling. Thank you for listening. We sat at a corner table, away from other customers. Zara ordered black coffee. I got the same. I know about the affair, she said without preamble. I've known for 2 months. Why didn't you do anything? I was gathering evidence, building a case, making sure that when I moved it would be decisive. She sipped her coffee. Your wife accelerated my timeline. How so? Zara pulled out her phone and showed me a video. Kina and Drake on his balcony, the same argument Benny had recorded but from a different angle. This was taken from my apartment, she said. I've been documenting everything. Photos, videos, audio recordings. I even hired a private investigator. What did you find? Your wife isn't Drake's first affair. She's just the most recent, and the most careless. She scrolled through more photos. Drake with different women over the past year. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, a pattern of behavior that went far beyond a single relationship. I could have divorced him quietly, Zara continued, taken half his assets, moved on with my life. But after yesterday, after the public humiliation of having divorce papers served at my address, she looked up at me, and her eyes were like winter ice. Now, I want him ruined. What do you have in mind? Drake's business depends on his reputation. Clean-living fitness guru, devoted husband, role model for his clients. What happens when those clients discover he's been using the gym's private training rooms for affairs? They find a new trainer. Exactly. And what happens when his wife, who owns the building his gym leases, decides not to renew his contract? I started to understand the scope of what she was planning. You own his gym? I own the building. The lease is in my name. Drake never bothered to read the fine print. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. He assumed that being married to me meant he was entitled to my assets. He was wrong. We spent the next hour planning. Zara had resources I couldn't match: money, connections, insider knowledge of Drake's business operations. I had different advantages: technical skills, surveillance equipment, and a network of people who were already turning against Kina. There's one more thing, Zara said as we prepared to leave. My cousin works as a private investigator. She's been tracking your wife's movements, and she discovered something interesting. What? Kina and Drake have been planning this for longer than you think. They were going to wait until after the holidays, then claim Drake was leaving me for her. Make it look like a romantic story instead of a sordid affair. But Kina jumped the gun. She got impatient, wanted the excitement of sneaking around, but also wanted the validation of being chosen over the wife. Zara's expression hardened. She has no idea what she started. I drove home feeling better than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but focused, purposeful. Like I'd found the solution to a complex structural problem, and was ready to implement it. My house felt different now, quieter, but not empty, more like a command center than a home. I spent the evening in my workshop organizing equipment and reviewing the evidence Benny had gathered. Photos, videos, audio recordings, financial documents, everything I needed to dismantle my wife's new life as carefully as she'd dismantled our marriage. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jade, Keena's friend. We need to talk." Jade Morrison was one of Keena's closest friends, a real estate agent with a taste for drama and a reputation for knowing everyone's business. I'd never liked her, and the feeling was mutual. "Meet me at Maggie's tomorrow at 7, I texted back. "Why should I?" "Because you want to know what else I have planned for your friend." She didn't respond, but I knew she'd be there. Jade was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She could see which way the wind was blowing, and she wanted to make sure she ended up on the winning side. Sunday evening, I walked into Maggie's to find Jade already waiting at the bar, nursing a martini and looking nervous. "Trent," she said when I sat down beside her. "Jade." Maggie appeared with a beer before I could order. "Evening, honey. How's the divorce going?" "Better than expected." Jade flinched. "Look, Trent, I know you're angry." "I'm not angry," I interrupted. "Anger is what you feel when something unexpected happens. This isn't unexpected. It's just disappointing. Keena's been calling me all weekend. She's panicking." "Good." Jade took a large sip of her martini. "She wants to come home. She says she made a mistake." "The mistake was thinking I'd take her back. She's staying at a hotel now. Drake kicked her out after his wife started making threats." I smiled. "Zara doesn't make threats. She makes promises." "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, I pulled out my phone and showed her one of Benny's surveillance photos. Keena standing outside the hotel with 2 suitcases, looking lost and desperate. "Your friend wanted excitement," I said. "She wanted passion. She wanted to feel like the kind of woman men fight over." I put the phone away. "How's that working out for her?" Jade stared at me for a long moment. "You're different." "No. I'm the same person I've always been. Keena just never bothered to pay attention." "She says you're being cruel." "I'm being thorough." Jade finished her martini and signaled for another. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. You came to me, remember? Keena thinks you'll forgive her if she just apologizes enough, promises to change. Keena thinks a lot of things that aren't true. So you won't take her back?" I looked around the bar. It was crowded for a Sunday night, filled with people who knew my story and were waiting to see how it ended. "Let me ask you something, Jade. If you found out your husband was cheating, planning to leave you, using your credit cards to pay for his affairs, and humiliating you in front of your friends, would you take him back?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No." "Then why would you expect me to?" "Because Keena's my friend. Keena was my wife, past tense." Jade's second martini arrived. She took a sip and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "She always said you were too nice, too predictable, said you'd never have the backbone to stand up to her." "She was wrong about a lot of things." "Yeah," Jade said quietly. "I'm starting to see that." I finished my beer and stood up. "Tell Keena I got her message about wanting to fix things. Tell her it's too late for that conversation." "And if she keeps trying to contact you?" "Then she'll discover that boring, predictable husbands can be very creative when they put their minds to it." I left Jade sitting at the bar and walked out into the cold October night. Tomorrow was Monday. Time to start the next phase of the plan. Time to show Keena and Drake what a real break looked like. Monday morning started with a phone call that changed everything. I was getting dressed for work when Helena Trenwall called with news that made me smile for the first time in weeks. "Trent, you need to hear this. Zara Torin's attorney just contacted me. Drake's gym lease was terminated this morning." "Already?" "Effective immediately. Breach of contract. Apparently, he was using the facilities for non-business purposes. Zara had security cameras installed last month. I sat down on the edge of my bed. She recorded him? Multiple times, with multiple women, including your wife. The footage is comprehensive. What happens now? Drake has 72 hours to remove his equipment and find a new location. In this market, with his reputation about to become very public, that's going to be challenging. I could hear the satisfaction in Helena's voice. And Kina? Still at the hotel, according to my sources. Still calling you, I assume. I looked at my phone. 18 missed calls since midnight. Something like that. Don't answer. Let her panic. Panic makes people make mistakes. After hanging up, I drove to work with a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. The Morrison building was being demolished today, and I wanted to watch. There was something satisfying about seeing a structure that had been rotting from the inside finally come down. Benny met me at the demolition site, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the grin of a man who'd been up all night causing trouble. Morning, sunshine. Sleep well? Well enough. What did you do? Remember how Drake likes to post motivational content on social media? Daily workout tips, inspirational quotes, photos of his perfect life? Yeah. Well, this morning his followers got a special treat. Someone hacked his account and posted some very revealing photos from his gym security cameras. I stared at him. Please tell me you didn't. Relax. It wasn't me. Zara's got her own technical team, and they're very good at what they do. Benny's grin got wider. The posts were up for about 20 minutes before Drake noticed and took them down. But 20 minutes is a long time on the internet. How bad was it? Let's just say your wife's face is now associated with some very unflattering hashtags. We watched the demolition crew set up their equipment while I processed this development. I'd wanted to control the pace of Kina's public humiliation, but Zara was moving faster than I'd expected. Any word from the hotel? I asked. Kina checked out this morning, paid cash, looked like she hadn't slept. Where did she go? That's the interesting part. She tried to go to Jade's house first, but Jade wouldn't let her in. Then she tried 2 other friends. Same result. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not guilt, exactly, but recognition. This was what happened when someone's support network realized they'd been backing the wrong person. So, where is she now? Driving around in her car, making phone calls that nobody's answering. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Trent, this is Kina. I'm using Jade's phone because you blocked mine. Please call me. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I love you. I showed the message to Benny. He shook his head. Too little. Too late. Way too late. At 10 a.m., the wrecking ball took its first swing at the Morrison building. The impact sent vibrations through the ground that I felt in my bones. 30 years of structural decay, brought down in a matter of hours. My phone rang. Helena again. We have a problem, she said. Kina's hired an attorney. Who? Marcus Webb. He's expensive and he's aggressive. I knew the name. Webb specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a reputation for turning simple proceedings into lengthy, expensive battles. What's his strategy? He's claiming you've been planning this divorce for months, says you've been gathering evidence and manipulating circumstances to make Kina look bad. I laughed. He's not wrong. That's not helpful, Trent. If he can prove you've been deliberately orchestrating her public humiliation, he might be able to claim emotional distress. Can he prove it? Probably not in court, but he can make the process very unpleasant for everyone involved. I watched another section of the Morrison building crumble. What do you recommend? Accelerate the timeline. Get this settled before Webb can build a case. How? Give me 24 hours. I have an idea. That afternoon, I drove to the hotel where Kina had been staying. Not to see her, but to understand her situation better. The place was a mid-range business hotel, the kind of anonymous location someone might choose when they needed to disappear for a while. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my truck across the street and made phone calls. To our insurance company, updating them on the divorce proceedings. To our mortgage lender, discussing the process for removing a co-borrower. To the credit card companies, reporting potentially fraudulent charges. Each call was routine, businesslike, perfectly legal. Each one made Keena's financial situation more precarious. At 3 p.m., Benny called with an update. Your wife's been busy. She spent the morning driving around to her friends' houses, trying to find someone who will let her stay with them. Any luck? 3 rejections so far. Turns out nobody wants to get involved in a messy divorce, especially when the photos from Drake's gym are still circulating online. Where is she now? Parked outside your house. I felt a spike of anger. She's at my house? In the driveway, just sitting there in her car staring at the front door. I started my truck. I'm on my way. Trent, wait. Don't do anything stupid. I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm going to do something smart. The drive home took 12 minutes through afternoon traffic. When I turned onto my street, I could see Keena's car in the driveway, exactly where Benny had said it would be. She was sitting behind the wheel, talking on her phone, gesticulating wildly at someone who clearly wasn't listening. I parked on the street and walked up to her car. She saw me coming and ended her call, rolling down the window with an expression that was part hope, part desperation. Trent, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. I know. We need to talk. No, we don't. She got out of the car, and I could see that the past few days had taken their toll. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. Please, she said, just give me 5 minutes. You had 8 years. You used them to plan an affair. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I pulled out my phone and showed her the credit card statements Helena had given me. 3 months of hotel charges, restaurant bills, gifts. This just happened? I asked. Keena stared at the statements, her face going pale. How did you get those? They're my credit cards too. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention. There's a difference. She looked around the neighborhood, suddenly aware that we were having this conversation in public. Several neighbors were watching from their yards, pretending to do gardening while obviously listening to every word. Can we please go inside? She asked. No. Trent, please. I know I hurt you, but we can work through this. The way you worked through your marriage vows? She flinched. That's not fair. Fair? I felt my voice getting louder, and I didn't care. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I found out about your affair from credit card statements? Is it fair that you humiliated me in front of our friends? Is it fair that you're using my money to pay for hotel rooms with your boyfriend? Ex-boyfriend, she corrected automatically. Right, ex-boyfriend, the one whose wife just kicked him out of his business. Keena's expression changed. What are you talking about? Drake's gym lease was terminated this morning. Something about inappropriate use of the facilities. I'm sure you can figure out the details. She stared at me for a long moment. You did this. I didn't do anything. I'm just a boring, predictable husband, remember? You're destroying my life. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just not fixing the things you broke. Keena looked around the neighborhood again, suddenly aware of how many people were watching. The neighbors are staring. Let them stare. You wanted excitement, right? You wanted passion? You wanted to be the kind of woman men fight over? I gestured to the crowd of onlookers. Congratulations. You're the most interesting thing that's happened on this street in years. She started crying then, big dramatic sobs that might have moved me a week ago. Now they just seemed like another performance. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices over multiple months. Can't you forgive me? I looked at her standing there in my driveway, crying in front of the neighbors, begging for a second chance she hadn't earned and didn't deserve. "No," I said simply. "What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know. That's not my problem anymore." I walked to my front door, leaving her standing beside her car. She called after me, but I didn't turn around. I went inside, locked the door, and watched from the window as she sat in her car for another 20 minutes before finally driving away. That evening, I met Zara Torrin at the same coffee shop where we'd first talked. She looked pleased with herself, which probably meant Drake's day had been even worse than Keena's. "How's your husband handling his career change?" I asked. "Poorly. He spent the morning trying to find a new location for his gym, but word travels fast in this business. Nobody wants to lease space to someone with his reputation." "And the social media incident?" Zara smiled. "That was my cousin's idea. She thought Drake's followers deserved to know what kind of man they were taking fitness advice from." "What's his next move?" "He's talking about leaving town, starting over somewhere else, somewhere his past won't follow him." "And Keena?" "Your wife is discovering that being the other woman is a lot less glamorous when the man you're having an affair with loses everything." Zara sipped her coffee. "Drake kicked her out of his apartment this morning, told her she was bad for his image." I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered the credit card statements, the hotel receipts, the months of lies. "She came by the house today," I said. "How did that go?" "She cried." "I didn't." Zara nodded approvingly. "Good. Tears are just another manipulation tactic." "What happens now?" "Now we finish what we started." She pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "Drake signed a settlement agreement this afternoon. He gets nothing except his personal belongings and a promise that I won't release the security footage to his professional associations. And if he violates the agreement? Then his former clients get to see exactly what kind of personal training he was providing." I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. It was a comprehensive destruction of Drake's life, wrapped in legal language and notarized signatures. "This is thorough," I said. "I'm a thorough person," which brings me to my next point. She leaned forward. "I have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "Your house, the one you shared with Keena. I'd like to buy it." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because it's a good investment, and because I want to make sure Keena understands that her old life is completely over." "She's still a co-owner." "Not if she signs a quitclaim deed as part of the divorce settlement, which she will if the alternative is a lengthy court battle that exposes every detail of her affair." I thought about it. The house had too many memories anyway. Too many reminders of a marriage that had been rotting from the inside while I wasn't paying attention. "What's your offer?" She named a figure that was significantly above market value, enough for me to buy a new place and start over completely. "Why so generous?" "Because I want this transaction to be fast and final, and because the look on your wife's face when she realizes she's lost everything will be worth every penny." I extended my hand across the table. "Deal." We shook on it, and I felt something shift inside me. Not closure exactly, but resolution. The kind of satisfaction that comes from solving a complex problem with an elegant solution. My phone buzzed with a text from Benny. "Keena's at Maggie's bar, drunk and making a scene." I showed the message to Zara. She smiled. "Want to go watch?" she asked. "Absolutely." We walked the 3 blocks to Maggie's together, 2 people who'd been betrayed by their spouses and had decided to do something about it. The night was cold and clear, with the kind of sharp air that made everything seem more vivid. Inside the bar, we found Keena at the center of a small crowd, gesticulating wildly while telling her version of recent events. She was drunk enough to be loud, but not drunk enough to be incoherent. "He's trying to ruin my life," she was saying to anyone who would listen. 8 years of marriage, and he won't even talk to me." "Maybe he's tired of talking," someone suggested. He's being vindictive, cruel. Maggie appeared beside us with 2 drinks. "Evening, folks. Here for the show?" "Something like that," I said. "She's been at it for an hour. Started with the victim routine, but people aren't buying it." I looked around the bar. The crowd listening to Keena was smaller than it had been when we arrived, and their expressions ranged from bored to annoyed. "What changed?" Zara asked. "Word got around about the credit card charges," Maggie said. "Hard to play the innocent victim when everyone knows you've been using your husband's money to pay for your affair." Keena spotted me then, and her expression shifted from self-pity to anger. "There he is," she announced to the bar. "My loving husband, who won't even give me a chance to explain." The crowd turned to look at me. I felt a moment of nervousness, then realized that most of the faces were sympathetic. They weren't looking at me like I was the villain in this story. "Explain what?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's complicated." "No, it's not. You had an affair. You got caught. Now you're dealing with the consequences. You don't understand what it was like, being married to you. Boring? Predictable." I nodded. "You're right. I was predictable. I came home every night. I paid the bills on time. I never cheated on you. Very boring behavior." Someone in the crowd laughed. Keena's face flushed red. "You're making me look like the bad guy." "I'm not making you look like anything. I'm just not helping you look like something you're not." She stared at me for a long moment, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "I hate you." "I know. You've ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." Keena looked around the bar, suddenly aware that the crowd was no longer on her side. The sympathy she'd been expecting had evaporated, replaced by the kind of uncomfortable silence that follows someone making a public fool of themselves. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes, it is." She grabbed her purse and stumbled toward the door, pausing only to glare at Zara. "You think you're so perfect. Wait until you find out what kind of man you married." "I already know," Zara replied calmly. "That's why I divorced him." Keena left without another word. The bar was quiet for a moment, then gradually returned to normal conversation levels. Maggie refilled our drinks. "Well, that was entertaining." "It's not over yet," I said. "What's next?" I looked at Zara, who was watching the door where Keena had disappeared, with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as expected. Now, we wait for her to realize she has nowhere left to run. Tuesday morning brought the kind of news that made me understand why people use phrases like the other shoe dropping. I was eating breakfast and reading the demolition report for the Morrison building when Helena called with an update that changed the entire game. "Trent, we have a situation. Marcus Webb filed an emergency motion yesterday evening." "What kind of motion?" "He's claiming you've been engaging in systematic harassment of his client. He wants a restraining order and an emergency hearing to discuss temporary spousal support." I set down my coffee cup. "On what grounds?" "He's arguing that you've deliberately orchestrated a campaign to damage Keena's reputation and financial stability. The credit card freezes, the public divorce service, the social media exposure. He's painting it all as vindictive harassment." "Can he prove that?" "He doesn't have to prove it. He just has to convince a judge that there's enough evidence to warrant an emergency hearing." I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the street where Keena had made her scene yesterday. A few neighbors were already out, walking dogs and getting newspapers, probably hoping for another episode of the drama that had become the neighborhood's primary entertainment. "When's the hearing?" "Thursday morning," which gives us less than 48 hours to prepare a response. "What kind of response?" "The kind where we demonstrate that everything you've done has been perfectly legal and entirely justified." After hanging up, I called Benny. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been expecting trouble. "Let me guess," he said. "Keena's lawyer is fighting back. Emergency hearing Thursday morning. What do you need?" "Documentation. Everything we've gathered, organized, and ready for court presentation. And I need to know where Keena spent last night. She's at the Riverside Motel, paid cash for a week in advance. The Riverside Motel was the kind of place people stayed when they'd run out of better options. Hourly rates, broken air conditioning, and a parking lot that doubled as a marketplace for activities that were technically illegal. How's she handling the downgrade in accommodations? About as well as you'd expect. My contact at the front desk says she's been making noise complaints about the other guests and demanding upgrades she can't afford. I smiled, despite the circumstances. Any word from Drake? He's gone. Left town yesterday afternoon with whatever he could fit in his car. Didn't even try to collect his gym equipment. And Zara? Already talking to real estate agents about converting the gym space into something more profitable. I spent the morning at work, trying to focus on routine building inspections while my mind was occupied with legal strategy. The emergency hearing was a complication I hadn't anticipated, but it wasn't necessarily a problem. Webb was good, but he was working with limited information and a client who'd made some very poor decisions. At lunch, I drove to the Riverside Motel to see Keena's new living situation for myself. The place was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. A 2-story strip of rooms that had been built in the 1970s and hadn't been updated since. Keena's car was parked in front of room 23, and I could see her silhouette through the thin curtains, pacing back and forth while talking on the phone. I didn't approach her room. Instead, I parked across the street and made my own phone calls. To the mortgage company, confirming that Keena had been removed from the loan pending the divorce settlement. To our insurance agent, updating the policy to reflect the change in circumstances. To the utility companies, arranging to have the services transferred to my name only. Each call was routine, businesslike, and perfectly legal. Each one made it a little bit harder for Keena to return to her old life. My phone rang while I was finishing the insurance paperwork. Unknown number. Trent? The voice was female, nervous, vaguely familiar. Who is this? It's Sarah Chen. I work with Keena at the consulting firm. I remembered her. Quiet woman, maybe 30 years old, one of the few people at Keena's company who'd ever been genuinely friendly to me at office parties. What can I do for you, Sarah? I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I thought you should know. Keena came by the office this morning. And? She was not good. Demanding to speak with Mr. Patterson, claiming she'd been fired illegally, threatening to sue for wrongful termination. Patterson was the company's managing partner, a man with very strong opinions about employee behavior and public scandals. How did that go? Security escorted her out, but before they did, she made some accusations about you. Said you'd been stalking her, harassing her, trying to ruin her career. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What kind of accusations? She claimed you'd been calling her clients, spreading rumors about her personal life, said you'd hacked her social media accounts and posted embarrassing information. Did anyone believe her? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Mr. Patterson asked her to provide evidence. She couldn't, but Trent, she seemed really desperate. Desperate people sometimes do things that make situations worse. After hanging up, I sat in my truck and considered the implications. Keena was escalating, making accusations that could backfire spectacularly if she couldn't prove them. But desperate people were also unpredictable people, and unpredictable people could cause problems even when they were wrong. I called Helena. We need to accelerate our timeline, I said. What happened? I told her about Sarah's call, about Keena's visit to her former workplace, about the accusations of stalking and harassment. She's building a narrative, Helena said, trying to make herself look like the victim of an obsessive ex-husband. Can she make it stick? Not if we get ahead of it. I'm going to file our own motion this afternoon, requesting an expedited divorce settlement based on Keena's pattern of false accusations. Will that work? It'll force Webb to defend his client's credibility instead of attacking yours. And given what we know about Keena's recent behavior, that's not a battle he's going to win. That evening, I met Zara at her apartment to discuss the real estate transaction. Her place was everything I'd expected: elegant, expensive, and cold enough to preserve meat. She offered me wine that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "How's the legal situation developing?" she asked. Keena's getting desperate. Making accusations she can't prove. Dangerous territory. For her, yes. Zara smiled and handed me a folder. "I have something that might interest you." Inside were photographs taken with a telephoto lens. Keena and Drake together over the past several months, in locations I hadn't known about. Restaurants, hotels, even what looked like a weekend trip to the mountains. Where did these come from? My private investigator. I've been documenting Drake's affairs for longer than you think. I studied the photos. They were comprehensive, detailed, and absolutely damning. They also showed a level of premeditation that went far beyond anything I'd suspected. "How long have you known?" "About Drake's cheating in general? Almost a year. About your wife specifically? 3 months. Why didn't you do something sooner?" "Because I wanted to be thorough, and because I was waiting for the right moment to maximize the damage." I looked at her sitting there in her perfect apartment, sipping wine that cost more than most people made in a day, and realized that I'd underestimated her completely. "You orchestrated this entire situation, didn't you?" "I provided opportunities. You and your wife made the choices. The divorce papers being served at your building, I made sure I was there to witness it, along with several neighbors who happened to be very active on social media. The security cameras at Drake's gym, installed the day after I confirmed your wife was having an affair there. I felt a mixture of admiration and unease. You've been planning this for months. I've been planning this for a year. Your wife just gave me the perfect opportunity to implement the plan." She refilled our wine glasses and settled back in her chair. "Does it bother you, knowing that you've been part of someone else's revenge scheme?" I thought about it. About Keena's betrayal. About the months of lies, about the credit card charges and the hotel receipts and the casual way she dismissed our marriage as boring and predictable. "No," I said finally. "It doesn't bother me at all." "Good, because we're not finished yet." "What do you mean?" Zara pulled out another folder, this one containing legal documents. "Drake signed more than just a divorce settlement yesterday. He also signed a confession." "A confession to what?" "To using my gym's facilities for inappropriate purposes, to violating his lease agreement, to engaging in activities that damaged my property's reputation and value." I scanned the documents. They were comprehensive, detailed, and legally binding. "Why would he sign this?" "Because the alternative was having the security footage released to his professional associations, his former clients, and his family. And this helps us how? Because your wife is named in the confession as a co-conspirator, someone who knowingly participated in activities that violated the terms of a commercial lease." I stared at her. "You're going to use this in the divorce proceedings." "Helena is going to use this in the divorce proceedings. It establishes a pattern of deception and illegal activity that makes Keena's claims of victimization very difficult to maintain." I finished my wine and set down the glass. "You really have thought of everything." "I told you I was thorough." "What happens after the hearing?" "After the hearing, your wife discovers that her old life is completely gone, and her new life never existed." Zara's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. She wanted excitement. She wanted passion. She wanted to be the kind of woman men fight over. Instead, she's going to be the kind of woman who serves as a cautionary tale. I left Zara's apartment feeling like I was part of something larger than myself. Not just a divorce, but a systematic dismantling of two people who'd thought they were smarter than everyone around them. My phone buzzed with a text from Benny. "Keena's on the move. Left the motel 20 minutes ago driving toward downtown. Any idea where she's going?" "Following at a distance. We'll update." 10 minutes later, another text. "She's at Maggie's bar." Looks like she's drinking alone. I considered going to watch, but decided against it. Whatever Keena was doing at Maggie's, it would probably make tomorrow's hearing easier to win. Instead, I went home to my empty house and spent the evening organizing evidence for Helena. Photos, documents, financial records, witness statements, everything we needed to demonstrate that I hadn't been harassing my wife. I'd simply been documenting the consequences of her own choices. At midnight, Benny called with a final update. Your wife just got thrown out of Maggie's for starting a fight with another customer. What kind of fight? The kind where she accused some random woman of sleeping with her husband, then threw a drink when the woman pointed out that she was the one having an affair. Where is she now? Driving back to the motel, very slowly. Probably shouldn't be driving at all. Any chance she'll get pulled over? In this town? At this time of night? With her driving like that? Benny chuckled. I'd say the odds are pretty good. I hung up and went to bed, knowing that tomorrow's hearing would determine whether Keena's desperate gambit would succeed or backfire spectacularly. Either way, I was ready. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of news that made me understand why people talk about the universe having a sense of irony. I was reviewing my testimony for tomorrow's hearing when Helena called with an update that changed everything. Trent, you're not going to believe this. Keena was arrested last night. I set down my coffee cup carefully. For what? Driving under the influence. She was pulled over 3 blocks from that motel where she's been staying. When? Around 1 a.m. She's still in custody, which means she'll be appearing at our hearing directly from jail. I felt something that was part relief, part satisfaction, and part genuine surprise. How does this affect the proceedings? It completely undermines Webb's argument that you've been harassing her. Hard to claim you're the aggressor when his client is the one getting arrested for reckless behavior. What's Webb's next move? He's probably scrambling to get her released and cleaned up before the hearing, but the damage is done. Judges don't look favorably on people who show up to court with fresh arrests on their record. After hanging up, I called Benny to get the details. It was beautiful, he said. She was weaving all over the road, ran a red light, nearly hit a parked car. The officer who pulled her over said she was belligerent, kept demanding that he call you to come get her. She wanted me to bail her out. Apparently, when he explained that wasn't how arrests work, she started crying and claiming you'd driven her to drink by ruining her life. How's that working out for her? Well, she's in a cell that smells like disinfectant and regret, so I'd say not great. I spent the morning at work, trying to focus on routine building inspections, while my mind was occupied with tomorrow's hearing. The arrest had shifted the dynamics completely, but I knew better than to assume victory before the battle was over. At lunch, I drove downtown to meet Helena at her office. She was waiting with a stack of documents and the satisfied expression of someone whose strategy had just been validated by events. I've been in touch with the prosecutor's office, she said. Keena's being released this afternoon, but she'll have to appear in criminal court next week for the DUI charges. How does that help us? It establishes a pattern. First the affair, then the public scenes, now the arrest. Webb's going to have a very hard time convincing anyone that she's the victim in this situation. Helena spread out the documents on her desk. Financial records, witness statements, photographs, and now police reports. I've also heard from Zara Torren's attorney. They're willing to provide testimony about Drake's confession, if we need it. Will we need it? Probably not. But it's good to have options. That afternoon, I met Zara at the coffee shop to discuss the final details of the house sale. She looked pleased with herself, which probably meant Keena's arrest had been even more satisfying than I'd imagined. I heard about last night, she said. News travels fast. In a city this size, everything travels fast, especially when it involves someone who's been making such a public spectacle of herself. She handed me a folder containing the real estate paperwork. The sale price was exactly what she'd promised, with a closing date that would finalize everything within a week of the divorce settlement. "This is generous," I said. "It's strategic. I want this transaction completed before your wife has any opportunity to complicate it. She's not in a position to complicate anything. She's not in a position to do a lot of things, but that hasn't stopped her from trying." Zara had a point. Desperate people were unpredictable, and Kina had been making increasingly poor decisions as her situation deteriorated. "What's your read on tomorrow's hearing?" I asked. "Webb's good, but he's working with impossible material. How do you defend someone who's been arrested for drunk driving while claiming they're the victim of harassment? You don't. You try to minimize the damage and hope for a settlement that doesn't destroy your client completely." "And if Kina refuses to settle?" Zara's smile was cold enough to freeze water. "Then she discovers what it's like to have her entire life examined in public court proceedings. That evening, I went to Maggie's bar to gauge the local reaction to Kina's arrest. The place was busier than usual for a Wednesday night, which probably meant word had gotten around about the latest developments in the neighborhood's favorite drama. Maggie greeted me with a drink and a grin. "Evening, honey. Heard your wife had an exciting night." "So I'm told." "She was here earlier, you know, before the arrest." "I heard she caused some problems." "Problems is putting it mildly. She came in around 10, already half drunk, and started telling anyone who'd listen about how you were ruining her life." Maggie leaned closer, lowering her voice to the conspiratorial tone she used for the best gossip. "Then this woman at the next table, complete stranger, made some comment about how maybe she should have thought about that before cheating on her husband. Your wife lost it completely, threw her drink, started screaming about how everyone was against her." "What happened then?" "I threw her out, told her she wasn't welcome back until she sobered up and apologized. She stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes yelling about how this whole town was full of hypocrites and backstabbers, and then she drove away. Straight into that red light on Maple Street. Officer Johnson was sitting right there, saw the whole thing." I looked around the bar. The crowd was different from usual, more upscale, more professional. People who normally wouldn't be caught in a place like Maggie's, but who'd come to hear the latest chapter in a story that had become the town's primary entertainment. "Word's really gotten around," I said. "Honey, this is the most exciting thing that's happened here since the mayor's son got arrested for embezzlement. Everyone's talking about it." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Marcus Webb. We need to talk before tomorrow's hearing." I showed the message to Maggie. She whistled low. "That's Kina's lawyer, right? The expensive one?" "Yeah. He wants to make a deal." I typed back, "My attorney handles all communication." Webb's response was immediate. "This is off the record, one professional to another. Not interested. Your wife is in a very bad position. I'm trying to help her avoid making it worse." I put my phone away without responding. Whatever Webb wanted to discuss could wait until tomorrow's hearing, when everything would be on the record and Helena would be there to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that made everyone walk a little faster and keep their heads down. I met Helena at the courthouse at 8 a.m., an hour before the scheduled hearing. "How's Kina looking?" I asked. "Like someone who spent the night in jail and is about to lose everything she thought was important." We walked through the courthouse security and found seats in the hallway outside the courtroom. At 8:30, Marcus Webb arrived with Kina in tow. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in days. But more than that, she looked defeated. The confidence and arrogance that had carried her through the affair and its immediate aftermath were gone, replaced by the desperate expression of someone who'd finally realized the scope of what she'd lost. Webb approached Helena. "Can we talk?" "Here's fine. My client would like to discuss a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Webb glanced at Kina, who was sitting on a bench staring at the floor. She's willing to accept an uncontested divorce with no spousal support in exchange for a quick resolution. Helena smiled. That's generous, but not sufficient. What else do you want? A quitclaim deed for the house, assumption of all joint debts, and a non-disclosure agreement preventing her from discussing the marriage or divorce in public forums. Webb's expression tightened. That's everything. That's the deal. Take it or explain to a judge why your client should receive anything after committing adultery, making false accusations, and getting arrested for drunk driving. Keena looked up then, and for a moment I saw something that might have been the woman I'd married 8 years ago. Scared, vulnerable, realizing that she'd made choices that couldn't be undone. Trent, she said quietly, can we talk? Just for a minute? Helena started to object, but I held up my hand. 1 minute. We walked to the far end of the hallway, away from the lawyers and other people waiting for their cases to be called. I'm sorry, Keena said. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I know you are. I never meant for it to go this far. You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just thought you'd be in control of how it ended. She was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the gray October morning. What happens to me now? I don't know. That's not my problem anymore. The house is being sold. The buyer's already been approved. My job is gone, has been for a week. My friends have seen the photos from Drake's gym. They've heard about the credit card charges. They've watched you make a fool of yourself in public. Keena started crying then, but quietly. Not the dramatic sobs she'd used at Maggie's bar, but the kind of tears that come when someone finally understands that they've destroyed everything that mattered. I don't have anywhere to go, she said. You should have thought about that before you decided our marriage was boring. Trent, the minute is up. We walked back to where the lawyers were waiting. Webb looked at his client's face and seemed to understand that his negotiating position had just gotten weaker. We'll take the deal, he said. Helena smiled. Excellent. I'll have the paperwork ready in an hour. The hearing itself was anticlimactic. Judge Morrison, no relation to the building I'd been inspecting, reviewed the settlement agreement, asked a few routine questions, and signed the divorce decree. 8 years of marriage dissolved in less than 20 minutes. Outside the courthouse, Keena stood on the steps looking lost and uncertain. Webb was already walking away, probably relieved to be done with a case that had been unwinnable from the start. What now? She asked. Now you figure out what comes next. And you? I'm going to have lunch with my realtor and sign some paperwork. I walked away without looking back. There was nothing left to say, and I had other places to be. That afternoon, I met Zara at her attorney's office to finalize the house sale. The paperwork was straightforward, the transaction clean and simple. By 3 p.m., I was no longer a homeowner, and she was no longer just Drake's ex-wife. Congratulations, she said as we shook hands. You're officially free. So are you. Yes, but I was free the moment I decided to stop pretending my marriage was worth saving. You're just catching up. We walked out of the attorney's office together, two people who'd been betrayed by their spouses and had decided to do something about it. What's next for you? I asked. I'm thinking about converting Drake's old gym into something more profitable, maybe luxury condos. And Drake? Is discovering that starting over in a new city is harder when your reputation follows you on the internet. Any regrets? Zara considered the question seriously. About divorcing him? No. About the methods we used? No. About the timing? She smiled. I wish we'd done it sooner. That evening, I went to Maggie's bar one last time as a married man. The place was crowded with people who wanted to hear the latest developments in the story that had entertained the entire town for the past 2 weeks. So it's official? Maggie asked, sliding a beer across the bar. Signed, sealed, and delivered. How does it feel? I thought about the question. How did it feel to be divorced? To have systematically dismantled my wife's life in response to her systematic betrayal of our marriage? It feels like justice, I said finally. And Kana? Is learning that actions have consequences. Maggie nodded approvingly. About time someone taught her that lesson. I finished my beer and left a generous tip. Tomorrow, I would start looking for a new place to live, a new routine, a new life that didn't include the woman who'd spent months planning to humiliate me. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly and a problem solved permanently. Outside, the October air was sharp and clean, carrying the promise of winter and new beginnings. I walked to my truck and drove away from the bar, away from the courthouse, away from the house that was no longer mine. Behind me, Kina was somewhere in the city, probably sitting in that motel room trying to figure out what came next. Ahead of me was whatever I decided to build from the wreckage of a marriage that had been rotting from the inside while I wasn't paying attention. The difference was that this time I was paying attention, and this time I was in control. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new apartment overlooking the river, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, when Benny called with news that made me smile for the first time since the divorce was finalized. "You're going to love this," he said. "Remember how Drake left town to start fresh somewhere else?" "Yeah. Well, turns out the internet has a long memory. Someone in his new city found the security footage from his gym and shared it with his new employer." "What kind of employer?" "Corporate fitness consultant. Very family-friendly company. Very concerned about their image." I could hear the satisfaction in Benny's voice. "Let me guess. They weren't impressed with his previous work experience." "Fired him yesterday. Apparently using gym facilities for extramarital affairs doesn't align with their corporate values." I looked out my apartment window at the city where I'd lived my entire adult life. The place looked different now, cleaner, more manageable, full of possibilities instead of problems. "Any word on Kina?" "That's the other reason I called. She's leaving town too." "Where's she going?" "Her sister's place in Phoenix. Apparently, it's the only family member who'll still talk to her." I felt something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. Kina had made her choices with full knowledge of the potential consequences. The fact that she hadn't anticipated how thoroughly those consequences would play out wasn't my problem. "When's she leaving?" "Tomorrow morning, driving cross-country in that car she couldn't afford to maintain when she was married to you." After hanging up, I spent the morning organizing my new life. The apartment was smaller than the house I'd shared with Kina, but it was mine. No shared mortgage, no joint accounts, no need to coordinate decisions with someone who'd demonstrated that her judgment couldn't be trusted. At lunch, I drove downtown to meet Helena at her office. She'd called earlier to discuss some final paperwork related to the divorce settlement. "Everything's finalized," she said, handing me a folder. "The house sale went through, all joint accounts have been closed, and Kina signed the non-disclosure agreement." "What about the criminal charges from her arrest?" "She pled guilty to a reduced charge, probation, community service, and a suspended license. Nothing that will follow her to Arizona, but enough to make her departure from this city permanent." Helena leaned back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd won a case that had never been in doubt. "I have to ask, do you have any regrets about how this played out?" I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret discovering that my wife had been planning to leave me? Did I regret responding to her betrayal with a systematic campaign to expose her deception? Did I regret the public humiliation, the financial consequences, the complete destruction of the life she'd been trying to build with another man? "No," I said finally. "I don't have any regrets." "Even about the methods?" She wanted excitement. She wanted passion. She wanted to be the kind of woman men fight over. I stood up and shook Helena's hand. I gave her exactly what she asked for. That evening, I met Zara at the same coffee shop where we'd first discussed our mutual revenge. She looked different, relaxed, satisfied, like someone who'd solved a complex problem and was enjoying the results. I heard about Drake's latest career setback, I said. Word travels fast. Yes, his new employer was very interested in the documentation I provided about his professional conduct. And the gym space? Is being converted into luxury condos, just as I planned. The construction crew starts next week. She sipped her coffee and looked out the window at the city that had been the setting for both our marriages and both our divorces. Any word on your ex-wife's departure plans? She's leaving tomorrow, driving to Phoenix to stay with her sister. Alone? Very alone. Zara nodded approvingly. Good. She needs to understand that actions have consequences, and that some consequences are permanent. What about you? What's next? I'm thinking about relocating myself. This city has too many memories, and I've accomplished what I came here to do. Where will you go? Somewhere warm. Somewhere I can start over without having to explain why my ex-husband's business failed so spectacularly. We finished our coffee and walked outside together. The November air was sharp and cold, carrying the promise of winter and the satisfaction of problems solved permanently. Thank you, I said as we reached our cars. For what? For showing me that boring, predictable people can be very creative when they put their minds to it. Zara smiled. You were never boring, Trent. You were just married to someone who didn't appreciate what she had. Her loss. Exactly. I drove home through the city streets, past the courthouse where my marriage had been officially dissolved, past Maggie's bar where Keena had made her final public scene, past the hotel where she'd been staying when her new life started falling apart. Tomorrow she would drive away from all of this, leaving behind the wreckage of a marriage she'd destroyed and a reputation she'd never be able to repair. She would start over in a new city, with a new identity, hoping that distance would somehow erase the consequences of her choices. But I would stay here, in the city where I'd built my career and my reputation, surrounded by people who knew exactly what had happened and who had supported me through the process of taking my life back. At my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window overlooking the river. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Trent, this is Keena. I'm leaving tomorrow. I wanted to say goodbye. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to say, and I had better things to do than provide closure for someone who'd forfeited any right to it. Instead, I opened my laptop and started researching new projects. Building inspections that needed to be completed, structural problems that needed to be solved, foundations that needed to be evaluated for stability. The work was exactly what it had always been, methodical, thorough, and absolutely essential. The difference was that now I understood how those same skills could be applied to other areas of life. Outside my window, the city lights reflected off the river like stars scattered across dark water. Somewhere out there, Keena was packing her belongings and preparing for a journey that would take her away from everything she'd known and everyone who'd discovered what kind of person she really was. Tomorrow, she would drive west toward a new life that would never be as good as the one she'd thrown away, and I would wake up in my own apartment, in my own city, surrounded by the life I'd built from the wreckage of a marriage that had been rotting from the inside while I wasn't paying attention. The difference was that this time, I was paying attention, and this time, I was in control. I closed the laptop and finished my wine, then went to bed in my own space, on my own terms, with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a complex problem with an elegant solution. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows and carried away the last traces of a story that had entertained an entire city and taught everyone involved that actions have consequences, choices have prices, and some mistakes are permanent. In the morning, Keena would be gone, and I would still be here. That was exactly how it should be.